in 1924, Adolf Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, My Struggle, a book filled with hatred. Its last passage is this fanatical cry: a state that refuses racial contamination will inevitably dominate the world. Adolf Hitler, born April 20, 1889. He commits suicide on April 30, 1945. How did this Austrian who came out of nowhere succeed in conquering Germany? How did he sow the seeds of hatred and violence? And how did Hitler and the Nazis drag the world into the apocalypse? How was the Hitler phenomena possible? In Mein Kampf, Hitler writes, "The First World War was the most unforgettable and most sublime moment in my earthly existence." For 4 years, Corporal Hitler has been a courier, carrying messages for Bavaria's 16th Infantry Regiment. He runs from trench to trench, delivering the soldiers their orders. It's a dangerous assignment. He is decorated with the Iron Cross. He will always wear his Iron Cross underneath his Nazi Party insignia. During the First World War, Hitler learns utter disdain for the value of human life, as do many other soldiers in this terrible conflict. Hitler gradually becomes a fanatical nationalist. Also, in the trenches, the confused idea is born that one day he will bear witness and stand up for his companions in misery. In other words, get into politics. Hitler will always know how to effectively exploit his camaraderie with fellow war veterans, as he does 15 years later in this speech to workers at the Siemens factory.
Volksgenossen und Genossinnen, meine deutschen Arbeiter, ich bin aus euch selbst herausgewachsen, bin einst selbst unter euch gestanden, bin in 4,5 Jahren Krieg wieder mitten unter euch gewesen und habe mich dann durch Fleiß, durch Lernen und ich kann sagen durch Hungern langsam emporgearbeitet. In meinem innersten Wesen bin ich immer das geblieben, was ich vorher war.
A succession of events would accelerate his political engagement. On the night of October 13, 1918, a gas shell attack makes him temporarily blind. He is evacuated to a field hospital and then to Germany. Meanwhile, at the front, The Germans are pushed back, and many are taken prisoner. Hatred of the French is omnipresent, fueled by the victor's injurious acts. Here, a German soldier's last possession, his pipe, is stolen by a French soldier. Prisoners, the soldiers of the Kaiser, German Emperor Wilhelm II, try to maintain their dignity as they're marched through the same French and Belgian villages they've laid waste to over the last 4 years. The rest of the German army begins its retreat in good military order with its weapons. These soldiers will keep the bitterness of a defeat that is portrayed by extreme right-wing propagandists as being caused by Germany's unpatriotic elements, those who negotiated with the enemy. At this moment, an event occurs in Hitler's life that he will always consider a turning point. He slowly recovers and eventually regains his sight in the Pasewalk military hospital north of Berlin, where the army treats cases of shell shock. Hitler recounts that when he learned of the emperor's abdication, the end of the German monarchy in favor of a republic, and the armistice of November 11, 1918 that marked Germany's defeat, he heard an inner voice. He states, "This voice called me to free the German people and to restore Germany's greatness." Hitler will never cease to exaggerate this event, transforming the hospital into a veritable temple dedicated to his miraculous mission. Above his bust, these lines from Mein Kampf will be engraved. "And so it was that I decided to go into politics." To this hallucination, Hitler will add his obsession. For him, the German eagle was stabbed by the Jews. In Mein Kampf, he writes, "If we had just once during the war used poison gas on 12 or 15,000 of those Hebrew corrupters of the people, the sacrifice of millions of men would not have been in vain." Already at the end of 1916, the heads of the Imperial Army, Field Marshal Hindenburg and his adjutant, General Ludendorff, in an ill-considered ultra-nationalist gesture, ordered an account of the Jewish soldiers suspected of unpatriotic behavior. Anti-Semitism goes back centuries and knows no borders. Dogged by this destiny throughout history, the Jews, whether poor and living in ghettos or assimilated in bourgeois, periodically become scapegoats in times of crisis. In Russia, at the beginning of the 20th century, they have been victims of pogroms, massacres. Many who fled the persecution settled in Germany. The big question is, did Hitler himself have Jewish blood? One of the Nazi regime's most closely guarded secret is that he's unable to prove the opposite. He doesn't know who one of his grandfathers was. The identity of his father's father is unknown. Hitler's grandmother eventually married a miller, Johann Hitler, who recognized the son, giving him his name. According to Nazi law, Hitler doesn't meet the so-called protection of the blood criteria imposed on the Germans, who, to avoid persecution, must prove that none of their 4 grandparents were Jewish. Hitler cannot prove that he isn't Jewish in Nazi terms. April 20, 1889, Adolf Hitler is born to a Catholic family in what is then the Austro-Hungarian Empire in Braunau am Inn, a small town on the border with the German Empire. His father is a customs officer. A widower, he remarried his much younger cousin, making it an interbred union. During Hitler's early childhood, the family moves often due to his father's changing assignments along the border. A model student during primary school, at 8, he is an altar boy in this monastery. He sings and admires the priest's self-sacrifice and sense of mission. He notices a strange cross upon the monastery's pediment. It prefigures the swastika, which will become the Nazi emblem. Hitler will always remember the monastery's cross, as if it were a portent of his destiny. In India, for centuries, the swastika has been a beneficial symbol of the perpetual movement of humanity. In the Nazis' deviant interpretation, it becomes the symbol of the Aryan race, a mythical pure race of tall, blue-eyed blondes, to which Hitler will add a helmet. And the mystique of a superior race.
Unseren Augen, da muss der deutsche Junge der Zukunft schlank und rank sein. Flink wie Windhunde, zäh wie Leder und hart wie Kruppstahl. Wir sind entschlossen, ein neues Geschlecht heranzuziehen.
Growing up, Hitler doesn't correspond to this ideal. He is pampered by his mother. He will return to this Austrian landscape at important moments in his career, like this one, a few weeks before his invasion of Poland and his provocation of the Second World War. Images of his childhood home, filmed and edited by his mistress Eva Braun and entitled, "The Führer Visits the Homeland of His Childhood, June 12, 1939. He stops to place flowers on his parents' graves, as is the custom. He bears no resentment towards his father, a strict disciplinarian who drank. But his mother, who died from cancer at age 47, was the only person Hitler ever really loved. During all of the Führer's birthdays, she reigns over the presents, and in his bunker during his final moments, Hitler carries her portrait with him. Hitler was in conflict with his father, who wanted him to become a civil servant. But Hitler will not go far in school, arrogantly considering himself above the education system. At 19, after his mother's death, he leaves for Vienna. He's not predestined to go into politics, since he dreams of attending the Beaux-Arts Academy. Thanks to his modest inheritance, he's able to live the bohemian artist's life. Vienna at this time is one of Europe's intellectual centers. Hitler discovers the upper crust lifestyle, against which the red flags of the socialist activists are unfurled. Having left his home province, he discovers the many communities living in the Austro-Hungarian capital. Czechs, Poles, Italians, Croatians, and Jews. He will later state, "It appeared to me like the incarnation of racial profanation." He makes a try at the Beaux-Arts entrance exam that he barely prepares for because despite all his ambition, he has little courage. He isn't admitted. The period that follows is a difficult one. It's just before the Great War. He lives in a boarding house for men and survives by copying postcards for tourists. With the little money he earns, he attends the opera to hear Wagner, which, as a friend recounts, sends Hitler into a trance. Hitler, whose everyday life is mediocre at best, dreams of these heroes of Germanic legend. One of his favorite operas is Rienzi, in which a young warrior takes on the mission of saving his people. Mobilization. Hitler is 25 this August 2nd, 1914, and the declaration of war will transform his failed artist's life. Earlier, to escape military service, he had fled Austria. Now he is in Germany, in Munich, swept up in the folly of extreme nationalist sentiment that is hurtling all of Europe towards the Great Massacre. Hitler has been identified in the midst of the crowd, enthusiastically welcoming the declaration of war. This photo will reappear opportunely during the 1932 election campaign. The Nazis make sure it's widely viewed. Their adversaries will denounce it as a photo montage. But one thing is certain, Hitler was indeed there. He fought in the war, and the war transformed him. After 4 years with his regiment, he returns to Munich, to a Germany in the throes of revolution. Hitler is 30 years old. A decisive period opens up before him. Above all, he wants to remain in the army, which guarantees order and stability for the new regime of the Social Democrat president, Friedrich Ebert. The young republic must deal with the Marxist revolutionary movement, the Spartacus League, who are trying to seize power like the Bolsheviks did in Russia 2 years before. The army crushes them, aided by volunteer nationalists, the Free Corps, a spawning ground for the future Nazi Party. Hitler serves in the army with great zeal. His primary goal is to keep a roof over his head and keep his mess kit, for which he'll stoop to anything. He becomes a provocateur, an informer, denouncing comrades he suspects of being Reds. His superior officers, whose duties include controlling the population by combating communist ideas, take note of his anti-revolutionary fervor. They give Hitler a mission: the political re-education of returning German soldiers and prisoners of war. Hitler's commanding officer notes, "He's a natural-born orator. His fanaticism and populism captivates listeners, forcing one to think as he does." Hitler says, "At that moment, I understood that I knew how to speak." Next, he would learn to use theatrical effects and how to dominate his audience, as shown in this 1933 film of which we have kept the original soundtrack. From his beginnings, Hitler knew how to escalate intensity and to feed his listeners exactly what they wanted to hear. In 1919, he denounces the national shame of the Treaty of Versailles. After months of discussions among themselves, the victors, above all France, England, and the United States, impose harsh peace terms on Germany, as if it alone were responsible for the massive carnage. The Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919, condemns Germany to pay enormous reparations, which will create a great burden on the economy and will become a central issue in Germany's popular grievances. Germany also sees 13% of its territories and 1/10 of its population amputated. Alsace-Lorraine once again becomes French, and the Rhine's entire left bank is demilitarized. A German film of the period denounces the carving up of the national territory. The worst is the separation of East Prussia from Germany to reconstitute Poland, partitioned in the 18th century, giving it access to the sea. The Polish corridor will be the issue that ultimately leads to the Second World War. For many Germans, the Allies' condition that paramilitary anti-revolutionary forces be disarmed adds insult to injury. They witness the destruction of their submarines, their battleships, and their air force. Germany's army is reduced to 100,000 men. Hitler, against his wishes, is demobilized into this Bavarian region in upheaval, where the right-wing extremist groups proliferate. Here, he is filmed for the first time during a demonstration of the DAP, the German Workers' Party. As early as 1919, the army has ordered him to infiltrate and spy on this group. Lacking better prospects, he remains a member and develops into a full-time political agitator. Politically, Bavaria is on the far right, whereas power in Berlin is with the center-leftist Weimar Republic, named after the city where the new constitution has just been voted into law. Hitler, transformed into a dyed-in-the-wool Bavarian, howls with the wolves against the November criminals, the signatories of the armistice and of the shameful Versailles Diktat. These sentiments are shared by the army, especially by the war veterans, who gather in Munich's large beer halls. One of these is the Burger Braukeller, where on August 13, 1920, Hitler makes his political debut with a lecture entitled, "Why Are We Anti-Semitic?" For Hitler, the answer is, beyond his visceral hatred for the Jews since the German defeat, that anti-Semitism is the best strategy for attracting nationalist militants. Hitler galvanizes the radicals of his small right-wing extremist group. They make him their leader and buy him a car, evidence of his importance. Hitler changes the party's name, associating the terms national and socialism. His goal is to create a wider appeal and to show his anti-capitalist stance. The DAP will now be the NSDAP, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the abbreviated form of which is Nazi. In his small headquarters in a Munich beer hall, he draws his party's emblem. He will write in Mein Kampf, "After innumerable attempts, I chose a red flag to show our movement's social dimension, with a white circle representing our nationalism, and the swastika, symbol of the Aryan, the eternal anti-Semite." To protect their meetings, he creates the SA Stormtroopers, his assault unit, a small militia whose uniforms he obtains from a stock of the former Austro-Hungarian customs office. His radicalism increases the party's membership from 2,000 to 20,000, multiplying by 10 in 1 year. He succeeds thanks to the help of a racist sect, the Thule Society, named for a legendary Nordic kingdom. Its members finance a newspaper with funds of questionable origin. This publication becomes the official Nazi Party newspaper under a new title, Völkischer Beobachter, the Racist People's Observer. Its editor, Alfred Rosenberg, is a member of the Tool Society and acts as the theoretician of anti-Semitism. Confused, if not to say deranged, he'll be an important inspirer of the Shoah. Another former member of the Tool Society during his student days is Rudolf Hess. He'll become Hitler's secretary and one of his most servile and fanatical accomplices. Another addition to the early militants' ranks is a World War I hero, Hermann Göring, one of Germany's most celebrated fighter pilots. Like many other veterans, he has difficulty readapting to civilian life. In Hitler, he finds someone who articulates his own anti-revolutionary ideas. He'll become the number 2 of the Nazi regime and an instigator of the concentration camps. In 1922, in a political march, Hitler places Göring next to General Ludendorff, still wearing his spiked helmet, to show veterans that their great wartime chief supports the Nazis. Ludendorff, one of the men responsible for prolonging the war, is convinced that the politicians denied him his victory. This theory is shared by many German generals. Ludendorff's adhesion to nationalist ideas opens up new perspectives for Hitler. Everything seems possible. In Italy, the extreme right, Benito Mussolini's fascist party, has just seized power. Will the German Mussolini be Hitler? 1923 will be the decisive year. January 11, 1923. Stunned Germans watch helplessly as French and Belgian soldiers take control of the Ruhr, Germany's mining and steel production region. This results from Germany's refusal to pay its war reparations, the indemnities imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. The French and Belgians are taking payment directly in the form of coal. Consequently, the German government orders passive resistance, a miners' and rail workers' strike. The French will simply replace the strikers. No coal is left for the Germans. The situation becomes dangerously tense. On March 10, 1923, a French officer, Lieutenant Pierre Coulpin, of the 17th Infantry Battalion, is assassinated. His coffin travels home through towns, and French officers slap any Germans who don't remove their hats. Indelible images, captured forever, will be profitably exploited by the Nazis, such as the 13 Krupp factory workers killed by the French on March 31st, and the execution of saboteur Albert Schlageter. The Nazis' newspaper depicts him as a martyr. In addition, it accuses African soldiers in the French army of having raped German girls. Once in power, Hitler has the offspring of these unions sterilized and will take further cruel revenge in 1940. Hitler denounces the weakness of the government that allows the French to treat Germany like one of its colonies. Germans are cold. Germans are hungry. They try to steal coal back from the French. The Weimar Republic must import its coal and pay the striking miners. These enormous expenses prompt the mint to begin printing huge quantities of new money. The mark depreciates dramatically, One day, Germans are paying 1 billion marks for a kilo of potatoes, and the next day, 460 billion for a loaf of bread. In this ferment of off-the-charts inflation and unemployment, the Bavarian extreme right mobilizes, with General Ludendorff as its leader. Thanks to Ludendorff, Hitler manages to unite all the veterans groups embittered by the defeat. He wants to attempt a putsch, a coup d'etat, to march on Munich and then Berlin. Hitler says, "Our people are subjected to such extreme economic conditions that if we don't act now, they'll change over to join the communists." Thanks to their accomplices in the army, the Nazis succeed in procuring guns. However, after hesitating, the army and police decide to remain loyal to the legal government. For Hitler in Munich, all seems lost. But he holds on to the wild fantasy that he and Ludendorff can still bring the population along with them. So he orders his troops to advance on the threatening police barricades. The two camps are face to face, with Hitler in his white coat in the middle. In fact, this is a Nazi photo montage intended to fabricate the myth of Hitler's courage. In reality, he was cringing behind a bodyguard who was killed in the shooting. For the police opened fire, putting an end to Hitler's 1923 putsch. 10 years later, after taking power, Hitler will institute a funeral celebration resembling a Nordic pagan rite every November 9th in commemoration of the 14 Nazis killed during the putsch attempt. Their names are called out every year. In response, thousands of Nazis and Hitler youth shout, "Present."
Andrea, Pauline, Klaus von Pape.
Hitler has a mausoleum built in Munich, and Germans are obliged to parade through it, their arms raised in memory of those Hitler calls the November martyrs. They must salute the mausoleum when strolling past it, even on bicycle. Further exploiting the putsch myth, Hitler creates yet another grandiose Nazi ceremony, the bloody flag. At each year's party congress in Nuremberg, he takes the sacred, blood-stained relic of the putsch, and with exaggerated and forceful movements, he touches it to the new Nazi Army battalion's flags, as if to consecrate them. This quasi-mystical celebration is part and parcel of the Nazis' science of falsifying history. In fact, Hitler had badly prepared his putsch, improvised and haphazard. He showed himself to be impulsive, ignoring the possible consequences. All of these staged ceremonies occult a fiasco which could have put an end to the Nazi adventure. For the putsch failed. Hitler was arrested, and the National Socialist Party banned. The great Austrian author Stefan Zweig wrote, "Thus, in that year of 1923, the swastikas and stormtroopers vanished, and Hitler's name sunk into oblivion again." Three months after Hitler's arrest, the trial of the putschists opens in Munich. Hitler is accused of high treason and the murder of 4 police officers, crimes punishable by the death penalty. Ludendorff, who has not even been incarcerated, arrives at the trial in a luxury car with his attorneys. He is freed without further ado, out of respect for his glorious past, and because he continues to have influential supporters. he will be acquitted. Hitler, who has threatened to kill himself, now realizes that the court is not as hostile as he thought. He draws on all his oratory talents, launching his usual fiery invective towards the government and the Jews. The trial becomes an unexpected pulpit, the judges becoming more and more sympathetic, and the public thronging to get in. As a result, the verdict is much less severe than Hitler feared. He's condemned to 5 years in a relatively comfortable cell, with a view of the countryside. The conditions of his imprisonment resemble a stay in a hotel, in that he is free to receive Nazi sympathizers at any time of the day. One supporter even brought a laurel crown for the man he calls the incarnation of the nation's ardent desire. Hitler is free to receive any news publications he wants, and he even begins reading Marx. Rudolf Hess, condemned to 15 months for his role in the putsch, has the neighboring cell and joins the small group who essentially discuss infighting between the right-wing parties who are tearing each other apart. Hitler's return is becoming a necessity. His accomplices on the outside devise a strategy to have his release brought forward. Hitler realizes he'll soon be freed, and he feels the need to expound his singular view of life and his political principles. He dictates his book to Rudolf Hess, who types it on a machine provided by a banker, and on paper brought by Winifred Wagner, the daughter-in-law of Hitler's idolized composer. Like Wagner, Winifred is a racist and deeply admires her good friend Adolf. Nazi journalists rewrite his hurriedly written manuscript. Hitler wants to name the book 4.5 years of struggle against lies, foolishness, and cowardice. But this title is considered too long and is changed to Mein Kampf, My Struggle. Even rewritten, the book remains unreadable. And yet, it contains Hitler's entire worldview, and the Nazis will make it their new Bible. Transcribed like the Holy Scriptures, and bound like the great medieval manuscripts. Hitler rants about the struggle of the master race, the tall, blonde, Aryan Germanic race, the necessary conquest of its living space, the eradication of communism, and the crushing of France and the Jews, who, in Hitler's eyes, do not even belong to the human species. At the time, many readers judged the book to be errant madness, a fatal error. On the contrary, it should have been read carefully and taken seriously, for it's at the root of the deaths of 50 million human beings. Hitler is released from prison on December 20th, 1924, for good behavior. Now, he dreams he's a successor to the great founders of the German nation, such as Bismarck. He claims, "My time in prison brought me confidence, optimism, and a belief that nothing could ever shake me again." And yet, his journey through the political desert is only beginning. Mein Kampf is a failure, selling barely 20,000 copies. Hitler spends much of his time in a Bavarian mountain village, Berchtesgaden, where he rents a small chalet. He meets a pretty 16-year-old waitress, Maria Reiter, and they have a brief affair. She wants to marry Hitler. He refuses, suggesting she be his shadow mistress. He'll ask the same of the other women he seduces, so that nothing can interfere with his mission. She leaves him. He writes the second volume of Mein Kampf. It deals mainly with his project of expanding Germany's living space into Russia. Sales of the book are average, until his taking of power in 1933. When Hitler does take power, Mein Kampf will almost be required reading, the German state offering it to couples as a wedding gift. If it isn't on your bookshelf, you could be denounced by your hired help. It will be distributed by Krupp Steel executives to their meritorious workers. By hook or by crook, over 80 million copies of Mein Kampf will be sold, and it's translated into countless languages. The royalty payments are astronomical, making Hitler a very rich man. On February 27, 1925, Hitler makes his political comeback in the famous Munich beer hall where he launched the putsch, reaffirming his leadership of the Nazi Party. The next day, an event occurs that will advance his cause. The very incarnation of the new German democracy, the first president of the Weimar Republic, Social Democrat Friedrich Ebert, dies at 57 from a badly treated case of appendicitis. Germans feel the loss strongly, as his government had succeeded in cutting inflation, and the economy was recovering well. Germans must elect a new president, and the swastika makes its comeback during the political campaign. The ban on the Nazi Party has recently been lifted, as it's no longer considered dangerous. In fact, Ludendorff, the candidate of the United Extreme Right parties, obtains barely 1% of the vote. Ludendorff's failure is what Hitler secretly desires, as it disposes of his main rival, for whom he half-heartedly campaigned. Revealing his political instinct, he says, "We gave him the finishing blow." The man the Germans elect is the other great war commander, Marshal von Hindenburg. In 1870, as a young officer, he was present at the proclamation of the Second German Empire in Versailles' Hall of Mirrors. He reassures the army and unites the conservatives, which worries the left and the rest of Europe. Hitler will lie in wait. The Nazi Party succeeds in spreading its cancer throughout Germany, its membership reaching 170,000. Hitler transforms his stormtroopers into a veritable private army. They are younger and younger, but let there be no mistake. This paramilitary order is composed of brutal fanatics, killers. Their new uniform earns them the nickname, the Brown Shirts. It imitates Mussolini's black shirts, who some years before marched so successfully on Rome.
Fascista o fascistas.
Another symbol borrowed from Mussolini is the Roman salute, the outstretched arm accompanied by a guttural cry. In Mussolini's case, it's Viva il Duce. With Hitler, it becomes Heil Hitler, long live Hitler. The SA uniform is created by a select team of German designers. Among the manufacturers is Stuttgart designer Hugo Boss, who promotes it in his ad campaigns. Hugo Boss, a Nazi Party member, will also produce the terrifying black uniforms of the SS, the Schutzstaffel, Hitler's new protection unit, as well as the Hitler Youth uniforms. This is all very costly. The money mainly comes from rank-and-file Nazi Party members and from rich sympathizers, such as steel magnate Fritz Thyssen, whose steel plants are ready to forge new guns. They also include Henry Ford, the world's largest car manufacturer. The anti-Semitic Henry Ford will strongly support the Nazis by giving them all the profits of Ford's auto sales in Germany. In addition, Ford, each year on Hitler's birthday, makes a personal donation of $50,000, a hefty sum in those days. Ford will be the first foreigner the Nazis decorate with the Order of the German Eagle. This is how the Nazis pay for their enormous party congresses and their vast propaganda operations meant to influence public opinion and galvanize their followers. The Nazi banner proclaims, Deutschland erwache, Germany awaken. In 1927, Hitler chooses Nuremberg, a Nazi bastion and a medieval city of historical significance with a Wagnerian allure which brings out its connection to the Germanic warlords of the Dark Ages. Hitler calls Nuremberg his ideological capital. He also wants to highlight the party's submission to the Führer, its leader. This personality cult will be enhanced through the work of his personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann. Always at the center of events, a Nazi from the start, a virtuoso of the Leica, he is always close to his master. Hoffmann takes a series of surprising photographs intended to show the great leader's personal side. To win over female voters, as far as the Nazis can grasp their preferences. In Hoffmann's small Munich photography shop, Hitler, as always, inspired by Wagner and fascinated by opera singers' theatrical movements, studies a whole range of gestures conveying domination, which he will use in the first big Nazi rallies. Hitler states, "The masses are feminine and stupid. Only emotion and hatred can keep them under control."
Jeder soll helfen. Diesem unerhörten Zwang beugen. Hatred. This is exactly what the SA is sowing throughout Germany, beginning with the Jewish neighborhoods in large cities. In what is still a peaceful society, Stefan Zweig is a witness to the birth of violence. He writes, "It was the fascist method, but in the German style, carried out with military precision. At the blow of a whistle, the SA would leap from the trucks with lightning speed, beat people up with their billy clubs, and at the sound of another whistle blow, they would jump back into their trucks and race away as fast as they had come." But the intimidation and terror produced sparse results. In Germany's 1928 legislative elections, the Nazis obtained only 2.6% of the vote,
less than 1 million ballots. The Communists received 3 times as many, the Central Party 4 million, and the Right 5 million. The Social Democrats come out on top with 10 million votes. Yet in the Reichstag, Berlin's parliament, this 2.6% of ballots, mainly from rural areas, translates into 12 new Nazi deputies. They create quite an impact, as almost all are wearing SA uniforms. Among them, making his comeback, is Hermann Göring. Wounded in the lower stomach during the putsch, he's gained a lot of weight and become addicted to morphine. It is finally Joseph Goebbels' grand entrance into politics. He closely corresponds to a maxim formulated by Nietzsche in the previous century. Fanaticism is the only form of willpower to which the weak and irresolute can rise. Goebbels is hardly the tall, blonde Aryan type. He's short, limps, and has suffered from an inferiority complex since childhood due to his clubfoot. However, his diabolical cunning compensates for this handicap. He's a rebel against society who flirted with Marxism until the decisive meeting of his life with Adolf Hitler. Goebbels then saw the light. By refusing to publish his manuscripts, the Jews have prevented him from becoming a great writer, and the communists are responsible for the chaos in society. He states, "We enter the Reichstag like wolves into the sheep pen." But it's impossible at this moment for either the public or the deputies to grasp the significance of his statement. The general public's view of the Nazis is expressed in the newspaper, the Frankfurter Zeitung. Hitler has no coherent ideas or thoughts. Hitler is a dangerous madman. He's arrived at this point by following the wartime ideology to the letter, interpreting it in a primitive way, as if we lived in the times of the barbarian invasions at the fall of the Roman Empire. Germany is not worried. It would surely take a major catastrophe for Hitler to have any future in politics. Historian Ian Kershaw writes, "Without the Great Depression, without the crash of 1929, without the disintegration of the bourgeoisie, the liberals, and the conservatives, Hitler would have remained a nutcase on the political sidelines." But Hitler will never abandon his mission.
Wir haben ein Ziel uns gewählt und vertreten es fanatisch von rücksichtslos bis ins Grab hinein.
When Hitler became dictator of Germany, he applied what he wrote in his book, Mein Kampf. A stronger race will drive out the weak races, for the vital urge crushes the weak to make room for the strong. How did Hitler manage to take power and become the supreme leader, the Führer? Nuremberg, 1929. The Nazi Party Congress is the real beginning of what German playwright Bertolt Brecht will call the resistible rise of Adolf Hitler. The devastating new economic crisis originating in the United States has caused havoc throughout the world, particularly in Germany. One after the other, factories close their doors, and the number of unemployed reaches the astounding figure of 6 million. Out of despair, many Germans turn to the Nazis or to the communists, who also have their paramilitary troops, complete with uniforms. Communists and Nazis clash violently in all the elections that follow. Hitler provokes disorder, while at the same time claiming to be the only man capable of stopping it. This tactic of blackmail proves effective. Hitler rallies the small business owners and homeowners to his cause by denouncing the threat of the Red Plague, the egalitarian Marxists, who also strike fear into the hearts of the peasantry. The result is astonishing. 100 elected Nazis enter the Reichstag, the German parliament. Hitler is now the leader of the country's second political party after the Social Democrats. Yet the upper classes who despise Hitler aren't particularly worried. Stefan Zweig wrote, "To them, power had always been the reserve of the barons, the princes, and those with a university education. Nothing blinded the German intellectuals as much as pride in their culture." And in the meantime, Hitler's rise continues. In just a year, he comes to dominate the extreme right in Germany. Veterans associations, such as the Steel Helmets, with 500,000 members, will have to obey his orders. Behind his domineering posturing, Hitler hides a terrible secret. He has just emerged from a scandal which might have finished him. Rumors of a personal drama circulate in the press. He had conceived a passion for his own niece, Geli Robal, aged 23. He loved her irrationally, possessively. She has just committed suicide. She was living with him in his Munich apartment. She confided to a friend, "My uncle is a monster. No one could imagine what he demands of me." She wanted to leave him, and now she is dead. A press campaign is launched against him, accusing him of sexual perversion and even of having Geli murdered. Extremely depressed, Hitler threatens to kill himself as well. His worried entourage decides to act. His photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, introduced him to one of his secretaries. She resembles Geli, Her name is Eva Braun. She's 19 and already quite worldly. She fits the bill. She's captivated by the Nazi Party leader's popularity. Hitler will make her his new shadow mistress. He declares himself a bachelor married to Germany to gain the sympathy of female voters. German women already have the right to vote, thanks to the feminist movement. Eva Braun is above all a sports enthusiast. She dreams of becoming an actress and starring in Tarzan movies in Hollywood. At her side, Hitler recovers his combativeness as a political animal at a time when the end of the mandate of Germany's President Hindenburg is drawing near. Hitler is among the candidates to succeed him in 1932. Hardly 10 years after his attempted putsch and incarceration, Hitler is on the verge of becoming president of Germany. Germans are subjected to an intensive poster campaign. Nazi propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels says, "Let us be grandiose." He devises an ultra-modern election campaign using airplanes, a European first. The largest commercial plane of the time is provided by the director of Lufthansa Airlines, who isn't adverse to this free advertising opportunity. Hitler, wearing a leather helmet, sets off on a tour of some 100 German towns where he can gauge his popularity. His pilot, Hans Bauer, recalled, "We flew in all kinds of weather, even in storms. Canceling a rally was out of the question." People ended by losing their fear of flying. Hans Bauer's conclusion? Hitler contributed to the expansion of air traffic. Goebbels invents the slogan, "The Führer above Germany." He forges the myth of Hitler the Supreme Savior during these aerial hustings, carefully filmed and then projected all over the country. But Goebbels cannot relax yet. The campaign costs a lot, and the industrial barons are still wary of Hitler's violent methods. The Nazis must charge everyone who comes to listen to Hitler the equivalent of €1. This doesn't discourage them. On the contrary. A witness, von Spaun, describes his reaction. "I suddenly felt Hitler's eyes on me, and it affected me for the rest of my life." A week before the presidential elections, Hitler brings together 100,000 Berliners, sick of the traditional parties, who seem incapable of facing the crisis. 20-year-old Jutta Rüdiger is in the crowd. "I can't explain the state that unemployment plunged us into. We really thought that Hitler alone could get us out of that misery."
Sie reden nicht von den Zehntausenden, die Jahr für Jahr den Gashahn aufdrehen, nicht weil es ihnen zu gut geht.
With his pseudo-social discourse, Hitler becomes a serious candidate for the presidency. The press have a field day. On the right, Hitler is seen as the prototype of the political adventurer. On the left, the insults are more personal. Hitler is described as a pansy, a half-mad cheater, a vain charlatan, a fake tough guy with a rhinoceros hide riding crop. The outgoing president, Marshal Hindenburg, although a reactionary monarchist, is supported by the left. This paradox reflects the growing danger of Hitler's rise, as is hammered home by his most determined opponent, Social Democrat leader Otto Wels.
Es ist keine Minute Zeit mehr zu verlieren. Nur einen Gedanken, ein Ziel kann es noch geben. Der Faschismus muss geschlagen werden bis zur Vernichtung. Arbeit und durch für die Freiheit, die Republik und die deutsche Schaffensarbeit.
April 10, 1932. The verdict is announced. Hitler will not be president. 13 million Germans have voted for him, a third of the electorate. It is enormous, but it isn't enough. Hindenburg, re-elected thanks to the Social Democrats, wants to be free of his dependence on them. He instigates a new election. And Hitler, continuing his resistible rise, starts campaigning again. As he gives 5 speeches a day, his entourage is reeling. One of his intimates says, "We were like seconds who have to get their boxer back into shape between rounds." But Hitler feeds off the crowds. He's carried away by his own virulence.
Die Gegner werfen uns Nationalsozialisten vor und mir insbesondere, dass wir intolerante, unverträgliche Menschen seien. Wir wollten, sagen sie, mit anderen Parteien nicht arbeiten. Die Herren haben ganz recht. Wir sind intolerant. Ich habe mir ein Ziel gesteckt, nämlich die 30 Parteien aus Deutschland hinauszufegen.
For Hitler, the first party to eliminate in the 1932 election campaign is the Communist Party. The stormtroopers are given the task. They are now 400,000 strong. They finance themselves, paying for their own uniforms and equipment. One of them, Wolf Teubert, works in a delicatessen in Hamburg. He is ready to join his motorized unit at a moment's notice. He states, "I had only one thought, to risk my life for Germany." The humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles had made me a passionate defender of Hitler. There was companionship, solidarity, and pride in wearing a uniform. We, who were ashamed of having been too young to have fought in the Great War, took advantage of our elders' experience. Goebbels concocts an idol to inspire them. Horst Wessel, a petty crook from Berlin who became leader of an assault brigade. Killed by the communists a year earlier, he was made the Nazis' token martyr. Speaking at his elaborate funeral ceremony, Goebbels had compared this man's sacrifice to Christ's. He had these images filmed to depict Nazism as a devotional practice like Christianity. He had original music commissioned for what he called the last poem of the dead SA member, and made it the official anthem of the Nazi Party, the Horst Wessel-Lied, the Song of Horst Wessel, the Credo of Violence. The Red Front are the communist militias. They always wear workers' caps and Russian blouses. All these militants, men and women, are inspired by their ideals. They too have their combat songs.
Let
Wir geben dem Feind einen kräftigen Tritt und was wir spielen ist Dynamit, unser Blick an der Bourgeoisie. So entsteht die Faschisten drüben am Horizont. Proletarier, ihr Betrüssen,
July 1932, the bloody summer of the election campaign. The SA stormtroopers, with the complicity of the police, provoke street battles with the communists. 100 dead and 1,000 wounded is the toll among the communists. Many Germans, exhausted by the disorder and the government's powerlessness, approve of the Nazis' violent acts. The result? 230 Nazis elected to parliament. Hitler is now head of the country's strongest political party. Power is within his reach for the first time. Quickly, however, euphoria gives way to disappointment. President Hindenburg refuses to name him Chancellor, head of the government. Hindenburg tells Hitler, "Before God, my conscience, and the fatherland, I cannot hand over power to a party as intolerant as yours." Nevertheless, Hindenburg offers him a role in the government. But Hitler doesn't consider himself an ordinary politician seeking a ministerial position. He wants all the power to establish a totalitarian state. In a few weeks, Goebbels, the head of the vast Nazi parliamentary group, succeeds in paralyzing democratic procedure. No majority can be formed. Now, Goebbels, smiling the malicious smile of his evil deeds, announces, "It's high time to dissolve this assembly, which no longer reflects the will of the people."
Ich halte diesen Reichstag für vollkommen überfällig und bin der Überzeugung, dass aufgelöst werden muss, weil nicht mehr dem Willen des Volkes entspricht.
Another election has to be called, the third within a year. It will take place in November. Hitler sees it as another chance to make gains.
Die Energie und die Zähigkeit gehabt von den damaligen 1000 Mann vor 10 Jahren bis heute 14 Millionen zu machen. Und ich werde aus den 14 Millionen die 20 und die 30 Millionen machen.
The election's results are a crushing disappointment for Hitler. Surrounded by his personal SS guards, he broods over his failure. He has lost 2 million voters and 40 seats. Goebbels says, "We've had a setback. Hitler refused to enter the government, and the voters didn't understand why." With bitterness, Goebbels reads the foreign press reports. The London Daily Herald writes, "Hitlerism as a political force is dead." The French daily, Le Populaire, edited by eminent socialist Léon Blum, headlines an article, "The End of Hitler." But no. 3 months later, Hindenburg, still facing the impossibility of forming a majority, finally names Hitler Chancellor of Germany. A student in Berlin, Sebastian Hafner, writes, "I've just heard the news. I'm frozen with terror. For an instant, I can physically smell blood and mud. I see something dangerous, like the big, dirty paw of a predatory animal raking its claws over my face." To achieve his end, the wolf disguises himself as a lamb. Hitler reassures Hindenburg by asking for only 2 ministerial portfolios for the Nazis. The Minister of the Interior would be a Munich policeman named Wilhelm Frick, with Hermann Göring at his side, also to control the police. two key positions. Hitler advances by subterfuge. His aim is to show that the most important ministerial positions have gone to a conservative, Franz von Papen, a former chancellor, and to the strong man of the extreme right, Alfred Hugenberg, Minister of the Economy and Agriculture, an aggressive and authoritarian hardliner. Hitler calls his government the Cabinet of National Concentration to make it sound like a nationalist coalition rather than a predominantly Nazi government. This very reactionary body believes it can control Hitler. Von Papen makes a costly mistake when he says to Hugenberg, "Hitler is our man," to which Hugenberg replies, "We oversee him." That very evening, January 30th, 1933, in Berlin and all the other large German cities, Goebbels organizes a torchlight parade of the Steel Helmet Veteran Group, the SS, and prominently, the SA Stormtroopers. Goebbels declares that 1 million people marched in the parade, but the British military attaché estimates them at less than 15,000 marchers, made to go around in circles for hours by Goebbels. They pass under the windows of the 85-year-old President Hindenburg, who, believing himself in Verdun in 1916, says to his aide, "Our men are parading well. They've taken many prisoners." Hitler, at the Chancellery, receives a frenzied tribute. Louise Solmitz, a Berlin schoolteacher, says, "It was drunkenness without wine." She adds, "I heard people shouting, 'Death to the Jews. Jewish blood will gush under the knife.'" Goebbels concludes, "It's like a fairy tale." At the Berlin Sports Palace, Hitler delivers his first speech as Chancellor. What is Hitler's plan? Absolute power, but by stages. There are still 200 communists and social democrats in the Reichstag. Therefore, Hitler's first move is to dissolve parliament and call new elections. His speech, broadcast on radio, is an appeal to all voters, even those on the left.
Und hege felsenfest Überzeugung, dass eben doch dann einmal die Stunde kommt, in der die Millionen, die uns heute verfluchen, hinter uns stehen und mit uns begrüßen werden dann das gemeinsam geschaffene, wiedererkämpfte, wiedererworbene, neue deutsche Reich der Größe und der Ehre und der Kraft und der Herrlichkeit.
With this relatively conciliatory speech, Hitler continues to advance wearing a mask. Goebbels, however, wants to clarify matters by returning to the fundamentals, anti-Semitism and violence, for the Nazi voter base.
Und wenn die jüdischen Zeitungen heute glauben, auf versteckte Drohungen die nationalsozialistische Bewegung einschüchtern zu können, sie sollen sich hüten. Einmal wird unsere Geduld zu Ende sein und dann wird den Juden das freche Lügenmaul gestopft werden. Im Übrigen können unsere Parteigenossen und SA-Männer auch darüber beruhigt sein, dass eher als wir alle denken, die Stunde des Endes des roten Terrors gekommen sein wird. Und wir werden den Herren vom Karl-Liebknecht-Haus bald Töne beibringen, die sie noch niemals vernommen haben.
Only 2 weeks later in Berlin, the Great Reichstag, the German parliament building, burns down in the night. Nothing remains of this powerful symbol of German democracy. The investigation carried out by the police under Göring incriminates a 24-year-old Dutch communist named Marinus van der Lubbe, suspected of a heavy record of arson. Quickly found guilty, he is guillotined. Who will profit from this crime? The Nazis. Hitler and Göring raised the specter of a red plot. Göring has 4,000 communists arrested, including the leaders. But the Communist Party isn't outlawed yet. For Hitler wishes to maintain the appearance of legality for the legislative elections, which he expects will consolidate his power. The Germans, fed up with election campaigns and disorder, see renewed action by the stormtroopers throughout the country to protect the population from communist attacks, as the Nazis put it. There are over 1 million stormtroopers. Now armed, they have the status of auxiliary police officers. All over Germany, they take up positions in front of the headquarters of leftist parties and workers' unions. Again, they will foment violence, while Hitler continues to play the electoral card to reassure an increasingly exhausted President Hindenburg. Göring, menacing in his Gothic-style armchair, fingering his dagger, gives his doctored version of the election outcome.
Der 5. März bedeutet für einen Mann und eine Bewegung einen gewaltigen Sieg. Der Sieger des 5. heißt Adolf Hitler und die Bewegung ist der Nationalsozialismus. Beides aber ist gleichzusetzen mit dem deutschen Volke und dem Deutschen Reich.
In reality, Hitler and his coalition barely win a majority. Even with all his propaganda and the intimidation by the SA, Hitler hasn't stopped the communists from obtaining 12% of the votes. At this point, Hitler tears off his mask and enters the realm of illegality with his government's complicity. He invalidates the election of the communist parliamentarians and has them arrested and sent to the concentration camps of Oranienburg near Berlin and Dachau near Munich, which have just been set up by the Nazis. These are the first of the 16 camps that opened in the year 1933 alone. The number of political prisoners rises to 100,000 during the first months of the regime. Communist student Klaus Bastian recalls, "The guards whipped the prisoners and pushed us into freezing water. We always feared for our lives, night and day." The Nazi version is that these parliamentarians, senior civil servants, and union leaders are being re-educated. The baleful shadow of dictatorship spreads over Germany. Since the Reichstag has burned, Hitler stages the new parliament in the Royal Opera House, surrounded by the SA, and demands unlimited powers. The communist members are gone, most of them to the camps. The 94 Social Democrats who are still present will summon the courage to vote against Hitler. They too will be arrested and sent to the camps, or forced to flee the country. 441 members from the extreme right to the Catholic center listened to Hitler's long, rambling speech intended to bolster the people's illusions. As always, he promises the earth, the end of unemployment, relief for peasant farmers, respect for the law, and above all, peace. The assembly votes its own demise by granting Hitler full powers for 4 years. No longer can President Hindenburg contest the Chancellor's decisions. To the sound of cheers, democracy dies in Germany. The fact that Hitler, whose power is based on anti-Semitism, now leads one of the world's most advanced industrialized countries, is seen as a universal threat. All over the world, anti-Hitler demonstrations, like this one in New York, protest against his barbarity, his obscurantism, and his anti-Semitism. All call for a worldwide boycott of German products. To dissuade them, Hitler orders a day-long boycott of Jewish-owned stores in Germany, meant as a warning. An amateur filmmaker, with the assistance of his wife, tests the determination of the Nazis posted in front of Jewish-owned businesses. Jews in Germany are horrified to see essay posters that read, "Not a penny for Jewish capitalism, buy German," and "The Jews are the cause of our downfall." It's the beginning of the persecution. Edwin Landau, owner of a large store in East Prussia, writes, before emigrating to Palestine with his family, "I changed completely in the space of a few hours. This country and this people whom I had respected and loved until then had suddenly become my enemies. I was no longer German, or no longer had the right to be German. I was ashamed of having once belonged to that nation. I was ashamed of the trust I had held in so many people who now removed their masks to reveal themselves as my enemies." Anti-Semitism had contaminated the universities. Nazism is perverting people's minds, turning them against modern culture, imposing an intolerant sectarian ideology that will lead the students themselves to burn books. With the help of school children and directed by stormtroopers all over the country, they gather works from libraries, bookstores, and publishing houses that reflect what Hitler terms an un-German spirit. On the Nazi blacklist are authors Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, Stefan Zweig, and 300 others, mainly Jewish or communist writers. 12,000 titles are condemned. Hundreds of thousands of copies must be burnt, and the stormtroopers prepare the pyres. In a radio broadcast from Berlin's Opera Square, Goebbels reads out the sermon of the Black Mass for an auto-da-fe straight out of the Dark Ages.
Meine Kommilitonen, deutsche Männer und Frauen, das Zeitalter eines überspitzten jüdischen Intellektualismus ist nun zu Ende. Und der kommende deutsche Mensch wird nicht nur ein Mensch des Buches, sondern auch ein Mensch des Charakters sein.
A young Berliner, Dorothea Günther, is present at the auto-da-fe and the Nazi ritual. Her description of the scene. The essay and the students shouted out the book's title and its author's name. They stated if the author was Jewish, a pacifist, a feminist, or simply a modernist. They would recite, we consign you to the fire, and would throw it into the flames. I was dumbfounded and deeply outraged, since we had read and discussed many of the works that ended up in the fire. French socialist leader Léon Blum wrote, "What was needed in Germany was for the communists and the Social Democrats to fight together." But the Social Democrats were unwilling. And as for the communists, Moscow had given them their orders: no alliance with the Social Democrats, described as socio-traitors. Stalin's suicidal orders were a gift to Hitler. Hitler suppressed the unions. Now, on July 21st, 1933, he outlaws the Social Democratic Party.
Das alles ist heiß! Die große Zeit ist jetzt angebrochen. Deutschland ist nun erwacht. Die Macht haben wir nun in Deutschland gewonnen. Nun gilt es, das deutsche Volk zu gewinnen.
The German people, for their part, can go on vacation. Henceforth, the Nazi Party is the only legal party. Its anti-Semitic slogans don't seem to stir many people up. They are largely indifferent to the fate of their Jewish compatriots, who, after all, only number 500,000, less than 1% of the population. Half the German Jews would manage to emigrate. Gerda Blockman remembers, "We succeeded in embarking on the condition of giving up everything we owned." The poorer German Jews would be stuck in Germany. They would be deported to the eastern ghettos, then exterminated in the camps. Opponents to the regime would flee, if they can, anywhere they can, especially to France, where they would later be trapped by the German occupation in the war and handed over to the Nazis. Many of those who cannot leave in time or who choose to stay to carry on the struggle would be captured and martyred in the camps. The vast majority of Germans would accept the totalitarian regime. Some would begin the day by hoisting the swastika flag, Germany's official emblem. The others, now that Hitler had muzzled the press, would read only Nazi newspapers. Their daughters, too, would learn the compulsory salute. Their sons would enter the Hitler Jugend, the Hitler Youth Movement, which will hone their aggressive tendencies. At school, teachers would show pupils how to handle weapons. Teachers would have to use down-to-earth, Nazi-sanctioned examples in math class, such as, how much does a pupil cost? A mentally handicapped young person costs the state 1,800 marks a year, the average pupil 320 marks, and a brilliant pupil only 125 marks. Answer: society can only survive if its citizens are genetically sound. The older daughters would join the BDM, the Bund Deutscher Mädel, the League of German Girls. It trained girls to be good wives and to bear many little soldiers. These would be killed at 10 years of age in the last combat actions in Berlin. However, the Germans are unaware of all this in the summer of 1933. Hitler is not yet the unchallenged supreme leader. To achieve this, he must continue numbing the nation by his propaganda. Such as the film Victory of Faith, that depicts the first Congress since the taking of power by the Nazi Party, now the only party. Hitler is well served by the talent of the young director Leni Riefenstahl, who charms him with her energy and beauty. With clever framing and lighting techniques, she glorifies the new god of a new mystique, a mystique of race, of the leader, of power and its apostles. Like the most loyal of the loyal, Rudolf Hess, one of the writers of the anti-Jewish laws. Like Joseph Goebbels, under whom propaganda has become an important ministry. Like Hermann Goering, who will resuscitate German aviation. And like Ernst Röhm, head of that horde of fanatics, the stormtroopers. Nothing gives cause to suspect that this film would be banned a year later, because Röhm, even though he has been Hitler's accomplice since the failed putsch of 1923, will be denounced as a traitor. Perhaps because he is too close to Hitler, or because the SA is too big. With 2 million members, it is a force that rivals the army. Hitler, to gain the army's support, will bring them into line and eliminate Röhm. It all begins the next summer when Hitler travels to Italy to meet Mussolini in Venice. Hitler is impressed by his elder counterpart, his role model. He's seeking Mussolini's approval for his plan to annex Austria. Mussolini refuses. He doesn't want Germans gathering on his borders. He doesn't warm to Hitler, saying, "He makes me think of a talkative monk." He takes him on a tour of Venice, pointedly starting with his battleship fleet, while Hitler has no naval force. Hitler returns to Berlin, mortified. He understands now that until he rebuilds the armed forces, he won't be able to carry out his plans. Hitler goes to observe the maneuvers of the Reichswehr, the German army, reduced by the Treaty of Versailles to 100,000 men, few in number, but very well trained. Hitler knows that to wage war, he needs generals, admirals, competent officers, strategists, and trained specialists. He's always promised to free the army of the straitjacket of Versailles and to restore its troop and weapon strength. But the generals want more, in particular to get rid of Röhm and his stormtroopers, who are in a position to supplant the army. Röhm is also harshly criticized for having delusions of grandeur. He steals the limelight from Hitler. Industrialists are worried by his declaration that The National Socialist Revolution is not over. Goebbels says he's a Bolshevik in disguise. They've been partners in crime for 15 years, but Hitler's decision is firm: to eliminate Röhm under the pretext that he has planned a coup d'etat. Hitler chooses his executioners: Himmler, head of the SS; Heydrich, head of the Gestapo; Sepp Dietrich, a former butcher who heads the Führer's bodyguard. Between June 30 and July 2nd, 1934, a period that Hitler calls the Night of the Long Knives, the SS murders Röhm and 85 other potential opponents and embarrassing witnesses of Hitler's past. With Röhm gone, the stormtroopers lose all their influence and are deployed only to keep order. The army is satisfied, as are the industrial barons, and Sepp Dietrich is promoted to SS general. When Leni Riefenstahl directs her next film, Triumph of the Will, on the Nazi Party Congress of 1934, only black SS uniforms are seen marching behind Himmler. Hitler is now alone at the top of the pyramid. A month after the Night of the Long Knives, the last president of the Republic, Marshal Hindenburg, dies at age 87. Democracy has been dead and buried for a long time. Totalitarianism continues its implacable march. Hitler becomes commander of the armed forces. His power is absolute. All the soldiers must swear an oath of loyalty to the Führer, our leader, and the leader of the German people, Adolf Hitler.
Adolf Hitler!
Hitler attends the Bayreuth Festival to enjoy the music of Wagner, his favorite composer. The composer's daughter-in-law, Winifred Wagner, who supported him during his difficult beginnings, welcomes him now as master of Germany. Hitler can now look back at how far he has come. He's achieved the demented dream of his youth: to incarnate Rienzi, his favorite Wagnerian hero, who sacrifices himself for his adoring people. Like Siegfried, he sets sail on the North Sea pursuing his fantasies, accompanied by those who created him, but who can no longer control what has become the Golem, the legendary creature of clay who blinds human beings by his hellish power. Hitler will first appropriate the successes of the Weimar Republic, such as the famous Autobahns, which will become showcases of the Nazi regime. Then, Hitler will strike by passing the Nuremberg race laws. He will burn synagogues to the ground in the Kristallnacht pogrom, prelude to the final solution. He'll violate the Treaty of Versailles by reoccupying the demilitarized zones of 1919. The weakness shown by the lack of reaction from France or England will lead Mussolini to draw closer to Hitler, allowing him to annex Austria, a step in what he calls his mission, to integrate all the German-speaking peoples into a greater Germany. He'll intervene in the bloody Spanish Civil War, sending his bombers to annihilate the population of Guernica, ensuring victory for Franco's fascists over the Spanish Republicans. He dreams of a great army, like Napoleon's, one he will lead to Moscow. All the while, proclaiming his desire for peace.
Wir wollen einst ein Reich sehen und ihr müsst euch schon dafür erziehen. Wir wollen, dass dieses Volk einst gehorsam ist und ihr müsst euch in den Gehorsam üben. Wir wollen, dass dieses Volk einst friedliebend und aber auch tapfer ist und ihr müsst friedfertig sein.
The Germans, drained by bombastic speeches and showy demonstrations, will lose contact with reality. When Germany is ready, Hitler, obstinate and ferocious, will drag it and the world with it into a long night, peopled by the ghosts of over 50 million dead.